The 1993 Mr. Olympia version of Dorian Yates teleported on the 2003 Mr. Olympia stage to challenge Ronnie Coleman in the second episode of the Kingslayer series. The first episode versus 2009 Jay Cutler is in the description. Front double biceps. These are the two versions that are more difficult to compare between these two. Ronnie outmasses Dorian significantly in 03, he has around 30 pounds on him in weight, but even in this medium quality footage, we can notice Dorian's superior hardness. However, this is one of the poses Dorian cannot challenge Ronnie, despite his superior midsection and overall flow. Ronnie dominates him in the guns department and with overall mass to the point where it becomes impossible to envision another outcome for this pose. For me, this is a standard 2-point win for Ronnie. Next, let's check out the side triceps pose. Why this pose now? Between Ronnie and Dorian, there are certain poses where one dominates the other without any discussion, and there are 2 or 3 very close poses that we're going to leave for the end, deciding the final result. Just as the front double is always a knockout pose for Ronnie against Dorian, the same could be said about the side tri, but the other way around. This is one of Dorian's strongest poses, while for Ronnie it's arguably his worst. Due to Dorian's superior triceps, superior presentation, and wow factor, especially opposed to Ronnie's weak presentation, this becomes a decisive 3-point win for Dorian. Side chest is next, and you guessed it, this is yet another knockout pose for Big Nasty against the Shadow. There are not too many things Dorian could hope to gain in this pose against Ronnie. He loses every single aspect of the pose, from the chest to the shoulders, to the arms, and even downstairs, except for the lateral head of the calf. I always thought Dorian's execution was lacking in this pose, so overall, this is a decisive 3-point win for Ronnie. Abs and thighs next, and I know Colemanites always point out that Ronnie has some of the best thighs ever, thus he should score more in this pose. But no, this is another knockout pose for Dorian against Ronnie. He is so much better in the upper body, having great abs and a superior taper, while downstairs he may lose in quad size, but he compensates with great muscle separation and an execution that showcases his strong points, namely the teardrop and the calves, and hides his weak points, namely his outer quads. This is a standard 2-point win for the Shadow. Ronnie's great thighs only prevent him from losing decisively in this pose. There is one more pose where Dorian loses decisively, and that's the most muscular. We don't have footage for Dorian hitting this pose as it wasn't mandatory back then, and actually the most muscular was not mandatory even in 03. It only became mandatory in 04, but in the Kingslayer series, we are counting this pose. So I'm sorry for all the Dorianites who hoped for something different. We're going to use pictures for Dorian in this pose, and as we can see, this is just like the side chest but from the front. Dorian loses all those aspects again in this pose, and I don't think that even the biggest Dorianite can argue that this isn't a 3-point win for Ronnie. Front lat spread is next, and we've reached the final 3 poses that are more tightly contested and could go either way. Dorian has to recover from a 3-point handicap, which won't be easy. Remember, the winner is determined by points, not individual poses, to decide the overall comparison. Back to the pose, what do we have here? Probably the pose that will be the most controversial. On one side, we have Ronnie that looks like a bulldozer ready to sweep out Dorian Yates, while on the other side, Dorian looks like the perfect embodiment of what this pose should really be about. Dorian has the wider clavicles, the bigger lats, but keep in mind that his footage is filmed from a lower angle, which is a huge advantage in this pose. Not trying to be rude, but aside from the lats and calves, Dorian looks like a classic physique against Ronnie here. Ronnie looks like a maxed out bodybuilder. There's not a pound of muscle you can add more to that frame. However, Ronnie forgot to keep his already sloppy midsection in check here, and his overall execution is poor, especially against Dorian. Dorian's physique looks to be designed for this pose, even his weaknesses are advantages for him in this pose. So Dorian is winning, but this is only a subtle 1-point win for him, nothing more, nothing less. Back double biceps. Dorian has the better muscle quality here, no doubt. He is drier, harder, and arguably has the better back, even though I think he could have opened up more. On the other side, Ronnie is complete. He dominates Dorian in the arms, shoulders, and rears departments, except for the calves, which, by the way, are not so bad for Ronnie. He loses to Dorian, but they're pretty decent. Now, if we were looking at these shots separately, I think you can find arguments for Dorian to win, but seeing them side by side like this, my eyes are drawn to Ronnie. He's just too big and good to not win this pose. To Dorian's credit, this is only a subtle 1-point win for the king, as I still believe that for the back alone, Dorian has the advantage. Our last pose is the back lat spread. Now, Dorian needs to win this pose decisively with 3 points to take this comparison into extra time, as the score for both poses and points would be equal. Let's see if Dorian is able to do that. Before anything else, this looks to be the closest contested pose in this entire comparison, and for sure it won't be more than a subtle win for either of these guys, so Ronnie becomes already the winner. However, if the Dorianites eliminate the most muscular pose, the score is perfectly equal before this pose, so any kind of win for Dorian would mean an overall win for him. Back to the pose, once again, Ronnie has the advantage downstairs, having the better glute-hamstring combination, but not a great advantage since Dorian compensates with decent glute hams on his own and the superior calves. Arms are out of the equation in this pose, so before looking at the actual backs, Ronnie's advantage is minimal. As for the backs, as always, Dorian is grainier, especially here where Ronnie was at his fullest. There is always a compromise in hardness when you go for fullness. You cannot have them both. However, the way I see things here, I believe that the difference in size and fullness for Ronnie is bigger than the difference in hardness for Dorian. I might upset some people, but I think Ronnie's back is slightly more impressive here. I'm not saying Dorian didn't have the ability to challenge Ronnie in this pose. What I'm saying is that Dorian was too downsized to challenge Ronnie at this 03 version. This becomes a subtle 1-point win for Ronnie, which overall becomes a pretty obvious win for the king with 5-3 on poses and 10-6 on points. So 93 Dorian is not the Kingslayer. Like and subscribe, and see you next time.